Hello. So I decided to record our third game on a digital board. I heard that it was kind of difficult to see everything on an actual board. So this is the third game of the tournament. I already showed you the previous two games. I ended up winning both of them with not that much of a struggle. This game is, I would say, the first sign of a challenge for me in this tournament. It's a really interesting game and it was against a strong opponent. The rating in these games can be deceiving, but remember that these are very young players. They can be either underrated or they can be improving very quickly. I was facing a 1750 rated opponent. I guess they aren't necessarily underrated or fastly improving, but the OTB rating is very, very different from online rating, and a 1700 player can pose some serious issues even for a high rated player. So I was facing a 1750 rated player. She was very young, and I didn't really prepare at all for this game. But I did remember some of my preparation against the Kansas-Sicilian, which she ended up playing. So I went with e4, c5, knight c3, which is the Grand Prix of the closed Sicilian. I tend to play that. e6, f4, and a6. Now I did remember the top engine line in this position, but it's not a very good one. I mean, some people do play it. I did find a better weapon with time, but this is kind of an odd system to face when you're using the Grand Prix, because the light squared bishop really likes to come out to c4 or b5 in Grand Prix setups, and right now both of them are prevented. I mean, I obviously can't go to b5. If I go to c4, that just walks into an expansion. I can't go back, so I have to go to e2. I don't see any reason to volunteer expansion and undevelop my bishop for no reason. Thank you, Liches. So I went ahead with knight to f3, first developing this knight, and I will have to see what I do about this bishop coming up. My opponent played knight to c6, and I played the top move d4. So this is why I say that this variation can be kind of an odd one. I opened up my king side, and I'm probably going to castle king side, but I'm just going for an open Sicilian a few moves late. I mean, so it's kind of a slightly worse version of an open Count Sicilian. Not a very inspiring setup for white, but I wasn't really that well prepared. I mean, I did remember that this is the top move, but it's not a very comfortable move to play. So c takes d4, knight takes d4, and bishop to b5. And bishop to b4, sorry. So pinning my knight to my king, but I played I would say, a pretty good move. I simply ignored this threat. You can do that often in the Kansas Sicilian because so many pawns were moved to light squares. Black giving up this bishop for doubled pawns, although these pawns are going to be very ugly. Your dark squared bishop and your knight will be so much stronger looking at all of these holes in the center and on the queen side, the dark squared holes that black now has. So bishop to e3, allowing black, if she chooses to do so, to just capture the knight, and knight to f6. I am out of book now. Once again, I didn't prepare very well at the beginning of the tournament, although I did know this opening. Now I do have some better preparation, and I am participating right now in a stronger tournament that I prepared much more deeply to. So I need to defend the e4 pawn, so I played queen to f3. I remembered that as a theme in some Sicilian positions, the queen goes to f3. b5, strange move. I don't think it's a good move, because of the following combination. I can take on c6, d takes c6, and a3. So preparing to... Now this either evicts the bishop, or if the bishop decides to take, then this light squared bishop that remains is going to be a very bad piece. c5 is a difficult break to put in, and I would love to stick my bishop there and never let go of the bind that I have on black's position. I think the best move would have been bishop to e7. My opponent decided to take the knight on c3. I took back, and in view of me going, in view of the threat of bishop to c5 to stop black from castling, my opponent castled right away, and I played bishop to c5 to cement this light squared bishop completely and not allow it to escape. My opponent has to move the rook, because this move does come with tempo. Now, at this point we can already stop and say, okay, although I did not like the way that I played the opening, I do like the result of the opening. I mean, I have a very, very good position right now, probably due to this move, the bishop takes c3, but I have this strong bind over the dark squares, and I managed to completely trap this light squared bishop. It has no future of escaping unless, even if black in the next move manages to play e5, I can play f5, and once again this bishop has no prospect at all. So I stopped here and I tried to calculate for a long time how do I keep the bind on black's position and not let her escape. I would say that the one move that I did anticipate was knight to d7 to evict my dark squared bishop, and then play c5, preparing to bring the bishop to b7. So what I had considered was rook to d1. I mean, first, let's say rook to d1, attacking the queen, knight to d7, not yet attacking the bishop, but being placed on the square that the knight wants to go to anyway. And then if the queen moves to c7, then I can maybe take the knight and basically claim that I sacrificed the exchange, but now you have this terrible bishop that will never escape confinement. So I couldn't see how that combination works, and I didn't think that knight here was quite a threat yet, because I can play rook to d1 after my opponent plays knight to d7. So I played bishop to e2, not going to d3 in order not to block the file. My opponent first went bishop to b7, and now I decided to go with rook to d1. My opponent actually, I think, played a very, I wouldn't say a very good move, but a good move. I mean, simply acknowledging this, although it doesn't turn out to be that good, because I can't regain control over this square. I would have to trade queens, which isn't ideal. Right now I can't trade queens. So I guess just prophylactic thinking, just placing the queen on an unattackable square. c8 is the square she chose. So once again, I'm posed with the issue of, do I sacrifice the rook if the knight goes to d7? I castled, knight to d7. So I had calculated this, and after like 15 minutes of thought, a long time of thinking, I came to the conclusion that it's very difficult to understand what's going on in that position. I wouldn't say it's good for me. I wouldn't say it's bad for me either. It's just, once again, if I go here, then queen check, and she frees the bishop, so this is not a threat. So queen to c7 is good here. And I try to evaluate this position. The issue is that she can reclaim control of the file very quickly. I guess I should play bishop to d3 and maybe even skip the tempo on the queen, because this file is going to get contested, so maybe bishop to d3 right away, or e5. But you can look at this position and see that it's very difficult to find a continuation that's very convincing for white. I mean, sure, you have some kingside activity, and something like bishop to d3, but g6, and this bishop is completely locked out of the king side. Every variation that I had looked at looked unconclusive, very strange and complex, and I couldn't really make anything of it. And I'm happy to see that after I checked with the engine did, I think this position has a +1 or +2 advantage. After taking the knight, it's zeros, it's equality, with some very difficult to find play for white. So after 15 minutes of thought, I reached the conclusion that rook takes d7 should not be played, but I really struggled to adjust and come up with a new move. What basically happened was that I thought to myself, well, I thought about this move for so long, I can't spend any more time on it. I just should play the first thing that comes to my head. And I ended up playing a terrible move. I played bishop to e3. Much better would have been queen to e3 to keep the bind, even at the cost of this powerful dark squared bishop, but I played bishop to e3, allowing c5 and a complete freeing of black's position. And even worse, I lose the e4 pawn pretty much by force. Bishop to d3 would have been great here, but c4 comes, and this pawn is pinned. My opponent is threatening f5 or knight to f6. Either of these would work since I can't bring any more defense to this pawn. So the engine does find a line that complicates things, and I don't think it loses a pawn, but it does still hand black the advantage with c4, knight to f6 and takes. I don't remember the line here, but basically after takes queen here, there is some very difficult not equality, but slight advantage for black. Instead, I confounded a blunder by playing another blunder, simply abandoning this pawn. I kind of panicked and I played queen to h3. Realizing that I'm going to lose this pawn no matter what, I did not spot c4 during the game, so queen to h3, bishop takes h3. Obviously a terrible couple of moves for a classical game. That's not a thing that should happen. You might think that this is only a pawn, but this is a very strong central pawn that was blocking in this light squared bishop, and I lost a lot of my advantage. I mean, all of my advantage. Now black is the one that holds the advantage in this position. So I need to defend my c2 pawn. I play bishop to d3, although it is offering a trade when I'm down material. This is a very powerful bishop, and I would be glad to prepare a rook lift, and if black decides to push away my bishop, I'm always happy to see c4 because it frees up this amazing square for my dark squared bishop. My opponent realized that her bishop is worth more. She does not trade and fix my structure or improve my rook. She simply defends the bishop, brings her knight to a more powerful square. I played bishop to c1. I'm trying to remember why I played this. I think it was to attempt and sacrifice a pawn not sacrifice a pawn, but play c4 and bring the bishop once again to the long diagonal. And I am happy to see c4 once again because I can reroute back to d4 and place a very powerful bishop on these still weak dark squares black has. My opponent did play c4 and I decided to take the bishop. She took back with a knight. I can't play bishop to e3 quite yet because then she takes on c3, so I play rook to f3. So I'm trying to generate as much counterplay as I can because my position, no doubt, is still very bad. I was actually counting on a tactic that black has here and I was hoping she would go for it. And you will see it in just a moment. But basically, this is sort of a lesson for any of you who tend to resign in positions that are not good for you, but that do still hold some counterplay within them. This is a great example. This position actually does not have a lot of counterplay. I mean, this pawn turns out to be very critical for my play. I mean, black simply has so much control over the center. My pawns are scattered. Black has an extra pawn on the king side and I simply have no play. The king side is incredibly strong and the knight is a very good defender of the black king side. But I still, in a classical game no less, try as much as I can to develop some counterplay. My opponent played queen to c5, checking my king and attacking the a3 pawn. I decided to give up the a3 pawn in order to bring my bishop to the long diagonal. So bishop to e3, queen takes a3, and bishop to d4. I gotta be honest, I liked my position just slightly more at this point. I felt like a kingside attack might be feasible now. Although this is obviously, I would say that I managed to bring the position into some sort of cutthroat battle. I mean, either black just destroys me with this pawn, which is obviously the likely scenario. The objective evaluation that I had and the engine probably does too in this position is that black is completely winning. Black is crashing and white has no chance of coming back, but in a practical setting there are more questions to be answered. So my opponent played queen to e7, a good move, simply going back to the defense. I played rook to e1, and I had some delusions here of maybe some advantage with knight to f6 and f5, or same thing here. It's a very powerful move, can't take because the pawn is pinned, can't push, so if I take I manage to settle black with a very weak pawn and a weaker kingside. But I missed an option that black has. I often miss these moves because they seem to be weakening. I dismiss them in my head, but it's a very good move. It's not the only move in this position to defend, but it's f5, cementing the knight, and it turns out that the knight is compensates completely for these supposed weaknesses. The knight just blocks the rook, the knight prevents this rook from moving, the pawn prevents my queen from moving and enabling the rook to move here. So my pieces suddenly after f5, the move which I had missed, are completely jumbled and they have no sensible place to go to. So I play queen to h5, trying to untangle my pieces, trying to do something like rook to h3, and maybe the queen comes back because obviously the threat here can be easily parried, but I just want to bring my queen back into the game, which is now very difficult to do. My opponent played knight to f6, absolutely not a bad move. Now my queen has to go back, but I'm happy that my rook is now open. I'm not happy at all, to be clear, this is still a very bad position, but I'm happy for this minor victory. Knight to g4, once again a very powerful move, freezing all of these pieces. This is not a move, and this queen basically has no useful moves. This is just repetition, this does nothing, and I can't even go back here. So the queen is almost trapped on the king side, which I don't want her to be since she's taking away a valuable square for the rook. So I try to bring the queen back with g3, weakening my king side, but my king side is actually very safe right now because of this powerful bishop. But at this point I realized that I did not realize this at this point. This has been the evaluation from the beginning since black captured the pawn on e4, but I am completely done after a5. And whatever I do, a4, black can just push this pawn not completely to promotion, I can defend, but this is obviously terrible. I have no chances of ever winning this game, or drawing, obviously. So g3, and luckily my opponent did not realize, I guess. I'm sure we talked after the game and she did tell me that she realized that she was better, but she did not realize why she was better, which is obviously the powerful extra pawn on the a file. A lot of other things make her position better. I mean, she has a strong central presence, she has a strong knight, but this bishop does look very menacing on the long diagonal. This pawn, this uncontested passed a pawn, simply gives her the win, but this move, rook to d8, it doesn't change the evaluation that much. I think it moves the evaluation from plus, I don't really remember, just a few tenths of a centipon, like maybe from +3 to -3 to minus 9.8 or something. But in my eyes, this is a double question mark blunder because it shows a lack of understanding of the position. Because some of the engine's moves after this one is like I play queen to g2 and just go right back, because that is the best placement for the rook, and no one is going to play that. So after rook to d8, I felt a lot more confident about my position, even though my pieces are still very bad. But I felt like I might be able to generate something. Queen to b7, eyeing my queen and opting for a queen trade since I am still down 2 pawns. And I played h3 to kick away this strong knight. If the knight goes here, I might capture it, I'm not sure, but she decided not to risk it and double her kingside pawns and weaken her king. So she played knight to h6. I played queen to e2, so that if my rook moves, I'm not staring at the barrel of a queen trade. And now we see a5 unsupported, it's a different matter altogether now. I triple on the e file, preparing to capture this pawn with check. My opponent defends the pawn. Trying to threaten something with every move and make my opponent activate my pieces and make my opponent more and more, I guess, stressed and wary, because even if you are in a bad position, making threats, the more threats you make, like you see, the more uncoordinated your opponent's pieces become. Right now, both of these rooks are undefended. There is no tactic to speak of. This is a better situation than the one we saw before, when the rooks were connected. So, obviously a small victory. Now I played rook to b1, eyeing the c4 pawn. It can now be captured, which she does allow, if I remember correctly. And we actually spoke about it after the game. I'll tell you what we said. She brought her knight back from the dead, knight to f7. The more moves that we play, the happier that I am with my position, although it's more about her moves being kind of odd, like bringing the knight from g4 to h6 and then to f7, a very long maneuver that did not really achieve anything. I felt like my pieces are now way more active than they were a few moves ago, and my attempt to muddy the waters and create some confusion were successful. Still black is better, absolutely. I played g4, once again realizing the nature of black's advantage and trying to confuse the issue and create some counterplay. My opponent decided to take. I think that's a good move. I took with the queen. I remember thinking, I just know for sure that an engine would like h takes, because it looks a bit menacing, and it keeps the pawn structure healthier. It keeps the king safer, but queen takes and I'm threatening mate right away. I'm staring at this pawn. The queen is very active. I'm opening the g file. This seems more like a double-edged, even if it is less objectively sound, it does feel like it's more double-edged and dangerous for both sides. So knight to h6, defending the g7 mate threat with the queen, uncovering her view. I played queen to h5. At this point, I remember thinking, okay, this might not objectively be a win for me or a draw, but I do feel like the moves that achieve a draw or a win for black can be very difficult to find. So now I'm threatening the rook with checkmate and the b5 pawn. So kind of not a difficult threat to parry, but not a natural one too. So rook to b8, once again a small victory, because her pieces are becoming less and less coordinated. Rook is undefended, the rook and the queen are defending a pawn. This queen is very actively placed on the king side. I would say that this is her best piece right now, aiming for f5. It might seem passive now, but after it reaches f5, it just kills my play. So I didn't want that to come with tempo and maybe allow her to capture my strong bishop, so I played rook here, rook to e5. In case she played knight to f5, I can just take here, so that move is prevented. My opponent played rook to d5 to block the rook's influence along this file, along this rank, sorry. Queen to e2. Previously I could not take this pawn because the rook was pinned to my queen, so I played queen to e2. Once again, I'm kind of repeating myself because I'm not sure how to explain the difficulty of this situation, but my position is becoming more and more active. Now there is a threat here, and if my opponent... Actually, the move that I think I was most worried about was in fact trading. And I did like it because I do have pressure on this weak pawn, but sorry, the rook is attacked. I remember seeing some move here that maybe it's this one. It sort of doesn't solve black's problems, but it does give black a very comfortable position. It's not this one. Sorry. I'm not sure what I was looking at, but I do remember that there is a much better move, and I remember evaluating rook to e8 as a complete draw after. I mean, that's what she played. So rook to e8, rook takes e6, rook takes e6, queen takes, and now the queen must block. I mean, sorry, the king cannot go to e8, the knight can go to f7, but then it's checkmate. Okay, the queen must block in order to avoid checkmate and maintain the defense on the rook. And now queen to c8 check. Once again, the queen must block. And we see a repetition of moves. And I managed to squeeze a draw out of a dead, lost position. I would say that some of the most interesting parts of the game, I want to show you guys one moment. So right here, after the game, she told me right away, I think I was better, and I told her, absolutely, you're completely winning. And we discussed some of the things that both of us saw during the game. So I forgot to mention right here, she mentioned you could have taken on c4, I take back and you take my queen. And I told her I don't think that's any good. I mean, I do win a pawn, but you still have the passed a pawn. A move like this simply kills me. I need to rush to, you know, to save my position basically, and this just seems absolutely awful for me. I don't like it. I decided to keep the queens on the board in order to have some more counterplay. And another move that I remember thinking is this one, right? Yeah. So e5 in answer to the threat of checkmate. A very complex move. This pawn is attacked many times, but it's uncapturable because if I take it, then black can play rook to g6. So I remember thinking that this is the best move because it also opens up a counterattack. A counterattack in the larger sense of the word that black is about to attack my king. I mean, I might not survive the moves. So king to h2, let's say, to avoid this spin. Rook to g6, queen to e2, and this bishop is uncapturable because of checkmate. And she said that she evaluated that this position wasn't that good because of king to h2, but I do think this is where her chances lied. Maybe with b4 or a4 once again, because my pieces are centrally placed, and if this pawn manages to promote or occupy this rook, then her position, like the principle of two weaknesses, right? On the one hand, this passed pawn is very close to promotion. On the one hand, a checkmate is always threatened, and my king is very weak. So I do understand why she decided not to go for this. Let's say after a4 I can take, and now I have a lot of counterplay, a passed pawn as well, although it is a very difficult passed pawn to push. But I would go for this if I was her. So that's one of the mistakes that she made, but Honestly, I remember seeing that the engine even gives this position an advantage for black. This is not still a draw. I don't think it is after rook to e8 either, only after she takes here. But this is just too difficult of a position to play. I do remember that after I take and check on c8, queen to f8, the engine does give me an advantage after queen to b7, I think, or queen to c6, attacking the rook and attacking the b5 pawn, menacing some counterplay. Plus 0.5, I would never want to play this position, although I do see the engine's point. I have some very powerful pieces and I'm about to win this pawn and have an attack, but at the same time, this pawn is attacked, this square is going to be beautiful for the knight. Like, I guess part of it is also that my opponent was, I mean, not my opponent, both of us were incredibly tired in this game that gone on for many hours. You begin to think less critically and less objectively so late in the game. I think it's been like 3 hours or 4 hours at this point since the start of the game. So third game was a draw against a strong player, but a player that I would really rather win against. I mean, I think that I could, seeing how I converted this game from a complete loss to a draw, I definitely think that if I had thought critically about that one move, that one mistake, I could have won the game if I played queen to e3 instead of bishop to e3. But we can't dwell too much on these small losses. We should just, I tried my best and I will show you how I took this game as a lesson. I did make the same mistake again. I mean, coming to the game with subpar preparation and making very early opening mistakes. But it's a lesson that you have to learn again and again. And the same goes for you guys. If you make a mistake, simply try to learn from it and not repeat it. So thank you for watching. I will try to give us the next game in the tournament sooner rather than later. So third game, and I'm on 2 victories and 1 draw. Good result so far. Thank you for watching.